What would you do if you came home with the best news of your life, only to find out that the person you loved most had already decided to throw you away? That is exactly what happened to me, and I want you to stay with me through every single word of this story, because what happened next is something I never could have predicted, and neither will you. Before we go any further, if stories like this one speak to something deep inside you, something you have felt but maybe never said out loud, please hit that like button right now, subscribe so you never miss a single story, and share this with someone who needs to hear it today. You never know whose life a single story can change. Okay, now let us get into it. My name is Claire. I'm 69 years old. And the day my marriage ended was also the day I finally understood what it means to be truly free. It started on an ordinary Tuesday afternoon in Colorado. I had spent the morning sitting beside my grandmother Eleanor's hospital bed, holding her frail hand while she struggled to breathe. Eleanor had been the one constant in my life for as long as I could remember. Not just a grandmother, a witness, the only person who ever truly watched me without judgment and loved what she saw. She passed away that morning, and even through the grief, I had to drive across town to meet with her attorney, because Eleanor had insisted on it. She had planned everything right down to the timing. That was Eleanor, precise, quiet, and always 10 steps ahead of everyone else in the room. The attorney's name was Walter Bishop, an older man, silver-haired, calm in the way that only people who have seen real trouble can manage to be. He slid a leather folder across the desk, looked at me over his glasses, and said something that made my hands go completely still. Your grandmother has left you $7 million and her estate in Aspen. $7 million. I sat there for a full minute without speaking, then I cried. Not delicate composed tears, real crying, the kind that embarrasses you in a professional office. Walter handed me tissues without saying anything, which told me he was a genuinely kind man. All I could think about during that drive home was Daniel, my husband, 27 years of marriage, years of financial stress, of barely making things work, of watching him panic over debts and contracts and bank calls. And now, finally, something had shifted. We could breathe again, we could travel, we could stop fighting about money at the kitchen table at midnight. I kept imagining his face when I told him. I imagined him lifting me off the ground. I was still smiling when I pulled into our driveway, and that is when I saw them. Daniel was standing on our front porch. Beside him stood his mother, Patricia Whitmore. She was holding a stack of papers pressed tight against her chest, and her expression was the kind of calm that only truly cold people can manage when they are about to do something cruel. The house is sold, she said it the way someone announces rain, flat, final. Almost satisfied, I stood in the driveway still holding my purse, still smiling from the attorney's office, still carrying $7 million worth of relief in my heart, and I stared at my husband, who would not look me in the eye. The movers already came, Patricia continued. Your things are in storage. I blinked. What? Daniel finally spoke. His voice had that terrible quality of words that have been rehearsed too many times. It's over, Claire, over 2 words. 27 years reduced to 2 words by a man who once drove 6 hours through a snowstorm just to bring me soup when I had pneumonia. I looked past them toward the house. The flower pots I planted in spring were gone. The porch swing Daniel built with his own hands 10 years earlier had vanished. Even the curtains had been changed. And in that moment, I understood something that hit harder than the words themselves. This had not happened suddenly. This had been planned, carefully, quietly, probably. For weeks. Patricia stepped down one porch stair and held the divorce papers toward me like she was offering me a receipt. You should sign while things are still. Civil. Civil. I almost laughed out loud. When were you going to tell me? I asked. Daniel rubbed his forehead like I was exhausting him. Claire, don't make this harder than it has to be. And right there, at that exact second, I thought about the leather folder still sitting in my car. I thought about Walter shaking my hand. I thought about Eleanor's smile during her final weeks whenever Patricia's name came up in conversation. I had never understood that smile until this exact moment. Patricia folded her arms. You'll land on your feet. Women always do. There was something almost impressive about how cruel she could sound while pretending to be generous. Now let me tell you something about Patricia Whitmore, because she is central to everything that follows. I met that woman when I was 34 years old. She hated me before she even knew me. Not openly. Patricia was far too polished for that, too country club refined, too practiced at delivering poison wrapped inside compliments. Oh Claire, you are prettier than Daniel's usual type. You are so brave to wear your hair that short. You have always been so independent. Some men find that difficult long-term, little cuts, tiny poisons, year after year, decade after decade. And Daniel always defended her. She doesn't mean it that way. That sentence became the unofficial anthem of our marriage. Patricia looked toward the street impatiently. You really should leave before the buyers arrive. Buyers? The word floated strangely through my mind. Then Daniel finally looked directly at me. The house sold 3 days ago. 3 days ago. 3 days earlier, I had been sitting beside my grandmother's hospital bed, holding her hand while she struggled to breathe. 3 days earlier, my husband was signing papers to sell our home behind my back. Something inside me should have shattered right then. But strangely, it did not, because at that exact moment, a memory surfaced so clearly it felt physical. 3 months before this afternoon, Eleanor had been sitting quietly at her kitchen table in Aspen while snow fell heavy outside the windows. She looked at me over her teacup and said something I had dismissed at the time. Never let other people rush you into signing papers, Claire. I had laughed softly. Grandma, you sound paranoid. No, she said calmly. I sound old. Standing in that driveway. Those words felt entirely different. Patricia shoved the divorce papers closer toward me. You can sign now or later. Makes no difference to us. Us, not Daniel and me. Not we, us, Patricia and Daniel. That single word told me more than any attorney could have. Daniel sighed. The house was under my name, Claire, legally. There is nothing you can do, and that sentence, that confident, careful sentence, almost made me smile, almost. Instead, I asked quietly, you already finalized everything? He nodded once. Patricia smirked. You always were too trusting. There it was. Not anger, not guilt, contempt, pure contempt. They thought I was weak, simple, manageable, a problem that had already been solved, and the funny thing is, I probably had been. At least until that morning. At least until Walter slid those documents across his desk. A strange calm settled over me. The kind of calm that arrives either right before a car crash or right after one. I looked up at the porch. At my husband. At the woman who had spent nearly 3 decades trying to quietly erase me from her son's life. And then I smiled. A real smile. Daniel frowned immediately. What is so funny? I looked at the stack of papers in Patricia's hands. Then at the house behind them. And softly, almost gently, I said, actually, the house you sold belonged to. Neither of them spoke. The wind moved through the trees above us. And Patricia's expression shifted for the first time all afternoon. Just a flicker, but enough, for the first time in 27 years. I was not the one about to lose everything. Now if you are still with me, and this story is landing somewhere deep inside you, please pause for just 1 second and hit that subscribe button, because I share stories like this every single week, and I do not want you to miss what is coming next. Like this video if Claire's strength is giving you chills. And send this to someone who stayed too long in something that was slowly breaking them. Patricia's confidence cracked first. Not completely, women like her never break completely in public, but the certainty around her eyes tightened in a way I had never seen before. Daniel stared at me like he was trying to solve something complex in his head. What does that mean? He asked carefully. I did not answer immediately. Honestly, I was not entirely sure myself. Not yet, but I knew enough. And more importantly, they did not know what I knew. That single gap changed the entire balance of everything. Patricia recovered quickly, of course. She gave a short dismissive laugh and handed the divorce papers back to Daniel. Oh please, she said, don't start with dramatic nonsense. But Daniel kept staring at me, because after 27 years together, he knew my face. He knew when I was bluffing. And this was not bluffing. I walked slowly past them toward the porch steps. Patricia immediately moved sideways to block me. You cannot go inside. I looked at her calmly. My coat is still in there. We will ship it. Ship it. Like I was already gone, already dead. For one brief second, real anger flashed hot through my chest. Not about the house. Not even about Daniel. About humiliation. About the fact that they had planned this carefully enough to pack my belongings before I even came home from my grandmother's while reading. They had used her final days, the days I sat beside her hospital bed, as cover. Daniel finally spoke again, softer this time. Claire, maybe we should talk privately. Patricia snapped her head toward him immediately. About what? There it was again. Control. She did not even try to hide it anymore. I thought about something Eleanor once told me while we sat on her Aspen porch drinking tea. When a man stops thinking for himself, watch the woman speaking beside him. At the time I thought she was being old-fashioned. Standing in that driveway, those words landed with the weight of decades. I stepped back from the porch. That is fine, I said quietly. I do not need the coat. Patricia crossed her arms. Good. Then she added the line she had probably been rehearsing since morning. You should be grateful Daniel is handling this peacefully. I almost admired the audacity of it. Daniel looked uncomfortable. Not guilty, just uncomfortable, like a man who senses a dinner reservation is about to turn awkward. And that hurt more than yelling would have. Because once upon a time, Daniel had loved me deeply. I knew he had. We met at a 4th of July fundraiser in Denver in 1994. He spilled iced tea on my white blouse, spent 20 minutes apologizing, then asked me to dinner before the night ended. He had kind eyes back then, warm eyes. The kind that made you feel safe inside them. 4 years, he really was safe. Until Patricia became the third person in our marriage. Not openly, never openly, always subtly. She questioned every vacation we took, every renovation, every financial decision. When we struggled after the recession, she inserted herself completely, helping refinance, organizing paperwork, managing Daniel's accounts. And slowly, without me fully realizing it, Daniel stopped making decisions. He started relaying them. Grandma Eleanor noticed yours before I did. She inserts herself like smoke under a door, she told me once. I defended Patricia every single time. That was what wives from my generation were taught to do. Protect the marriage. Keep peace. Absorb discomfort quietly. And slowly, without realizing it, you disappear. The sound of a vehicle turning onto the street pulled me back. Daniel straightened his shirt nervously. Patricia forced another polished smile into position. A black SUV rolled slowly to the curb. 2 men stepped out, one younger, clearly an attorney. The other looked around 70. Expensive coat, silver hair. The kind of steady posture that belongs to someone accustomed to walking into tense situations without fear. The older man looked directly at me first. Not Daniel, not Patricia, me. Interesting timing. He said simply. Daniel stepped forward with his hand extended. Daniel Whitmore. We spoke on the phone. The older man shook it briefly. Walter Bishop. His attorney opened a leather folder quietly beside him. Patricia shifted into hostess mode immediately. We are just finishing a family matter. Walter's eyes rested on the divorce papers in Daniel's hand. Yes, he said. I can see that. Then he looked toward me again. You must be Claire. I nodded slowly. Walter studied me for several seconds. Then he said something that rearranged the entire atmosphere of that driveway instantly. Your grandmother spoke very highly of you. Daniel froze. Patricia blinked hard, and suddenly the air felt different, heavier, charged. Walter reached into his coat pocket and removed a folded envelope, cream-colored. My grandmother's handwriting. My heart stopped completely. She asked me to give you this personally, he said, but only under specific circumstances. Nobody spoke, he continued. She said, and here he paused, looking directly at Daniel, if this house was ever sold without your full knowledge, there would likely be confusion about ownership. Daniel laughed nervously. What confusion? Walter did not even glance at him. He held the envelope toward me. My hands trembled as I took it. Across the front, in Eleanor's careful script, for Claire. If Patricia finally gets her way. A cold wave moved through my entire body. Not fear, recognition. Grandma knew. She knew. Daniel stepped closer. Claire, what is this? I looked up at him, really looked at him, the man I had spent almost 30 years trusting. Then I looked at Patricia, and for the very first time since the day I met her, I saw something behind her eyes that I had never seen there before. Real fear. Walter's attorney quietly opened another folder. Before anyone moves into this property, he said calmly, we should discuss the trust agreement connected to the estate. Trust agreement. Daniel went white immediately. Patricia whispered, what trust? And standing in that driveway with evening shadows beginning to stretch across the lawn, I realized my grandmother had not simply left me money. She had left me armor. This is the part of the story where I need you to do something for me. If you have made it this far, if this story is hitting somewhere real inside you, I want you to share it right now. Text it, send it, post it. Because somewhere out there is a woman sitting exactly where Claire was sitting, and she needs to know that somebody already saw this coming and left a door unlocked for her. Like, subscribe and share. It matters more than you know. Nobody spoke for a long moment after the words trust agreement were spoken. A dog barked somewhere down the street. Wine moved through the pines. Across the road, a neighbor was watering her roses while very obviously pretending not to stare. Daniel swallowed. I think there has been some misunderstanding. Walter calmly removed his gloves. No, he said. I do not believe there has. Patricia stepped forward immediately. Her laugh painfully artificial now. Daniel legally owned this property. The younger attorney looked up from his folder. Partially. He corrected. Partially. I watched that single word land on Daniel like something physical. Patricia noticed too. She turned toward him sharply. What does that mean? He did not answer. Walter looked toward me gently. Mrs. Harper, would you like to open the letter now? I nodded slowly. My fingers trembled as I unfolded the envelope. The paper smelled faintly of Eleanor's perfume, lavender and cedarwood. For one brief second, I forgot the house, forgot Daniel, forgot Patricia. All I could think about was my grandmother sitting alone in her aspen study during her final weeks, knowing she was dying, quietly preparing for this exact moment. Claire. The letter began, if you are reading this, then I was right to worry. I stopped breathing. Daniel shifted impatiently beside the porch. I kept reading, you always believed love could fix dishonesty. That was your mother's weakness too. A lump rose painfully in my throat. My mother died when I was 19. Eleanor rarely spoke about her directly. Daniel is not an evil man, the letter continued. But weak men become dangerous when stronger people whisper in their ears long enough. My eyes lifted instinctively toward Patricia. She looked furious now. Give me that, she snapped. Walter's attorney stepped between us immediately. No. Patricia froze, probably not accustomed to hearing that word spoken with such absolute finality. Daniel rubbed both hands over his face. This is insane. What is insane? Walter replied calmly. Is selling property connected to an active trust without understanding the legal structure? What trust? Daniel demanded. Walter exchanged a brief glance with his attorney. Then the attorney spoke. 6 years ago, he explained, Mrs. Eleanor Bennett quietly transferred a protected ownership percentage connected to this property, following her assistance with Mr. Whitmore's financial liabilities. My mind flashed backward instantly. 6 years earlier, Daniel's construction business had nearly collapsed. To terrible contracts, a lawsuit, debt collectors calling daily. Then suddenly, everything stabilized. When I asked Daniel how, he told me Patricia had arranged the financing. I believed him without question. But now another memory surfaced. Eleanor calling me late one evening. Don't worry about the house, she said softly. I handled it. At the time I thought she meant emotional support. Now I understood. She literally handled it. Legally, financially, quietly, without any fanfare. Daniel looked pale. What percentage? The attorney answered immediately. Enough to complicate unauthorized sale proceedings significantly. Patricia exploded. Oh, for God's sake, Daniel, what did you sign? There were hundreds of pages. He snapped back. And you signed them without reading. You told me the refinancing had to move fast. The silence afterward was almost embarrassing, because suddenly the truth stood completely exposed in front of all of us. They were not masterminds. They were greedy amateurs who had moved too quickly against someone whose grandmother had been a great deal smarter than all of them combined. Walter adjusted his coat calmly while Patricia's composure continued cracking. She pointed toward me furiously. She knew about this. I did not, I said honestly. And I truly had not fully, but Eleanor had. And that realization settled deep inside me now like something warm and permanent. Daniel looked at me desperately. Claire, listen, we can figure this out. Interesting. 10 minutes earlier, I was homeless. Now suddenly we existed again. I folded Eleanor's letter carefully. You already figured things out, Daniel. 3 days ago, that is not fair. Walter removed his glasses. Before we continue, I want to clarify something. Nobody interrupted. The sale itself may not be completely invalid. Patricia smirked, but Walter continued without looking at her. However, depending on intent, disclosure, and timing, several serious legal complications exist. Daniel rubbed his forehead. What complications? Failure to disclose protected trust interests, potential financial concealment during marital dissolution proceedings, improper transfer timing. Patricia waved her hand. You lawyers make everything sound dramatic. The younger attorney looked directly at her. No ma'am, courts do. That silenced her. Walter turned toward me gently. Your grandmother requested that a second envelope only be opened if you discovered evidence of betrayal involving the property. Second envelope. Of course there was another one. Eleanor had always believed important things deserved layers. She once wrapped my Christmas gifts inside 5 separate boxes purely because she enjoyed the suspense. Walter slid the envelope toward me. I stared at my grandmother's handwriting across the front. For Claire, when the truth finally becomes impossible to ignore. My chest ached reading that, because deep down, part of me had always known, not about the house specifically, not about the divorce, but about Daniel slowly disappearing from our marriage year after year while I pretended not to notice. I had been grieving us for years before that driveway. Inside the second envelope was another handwritten letter and several photocopied documents, bank transfers, property records, emails. I looked down at the first sentence. If you are reading this, then Patricia finally overplayed her hand. I continued reading silently. Then I looked up at Daniel. You used the money my mother left me? He blinked. What? I lifted one of the documents. You told me we used your savings during the recession. Patricia leaned forward immediately. Claire, wait, no. That word surprised even me. Patricia froze. I stared at Daniel. You used the inheritance from my mother. He looked trapped, cornered, like a man who realizes the locked doors around him were built entirely from his own choices. It was temporary, he muttered. How much? Silence. How much, Daniel? Almost all of it. The fireplace crackled softly beside us. Somewhere across the lounge, silverware clinked against plates. Ordinary sounds, ordinary life continuing quietly while mine cracked open. My mother left me $80,000 when she died. Not enough to change a life, but enough to matter, enough to remember her by. I had held that money carefully for years, thinking of it as something sacred. Daniel reached toward me. Claire, I was trying to save the business. Patricia jumped in immediately. And that business supported you for years. Walter calmly slid another document across the table. Actually, the business losses accelerated significantly, following several withdrawals connected to Patricia Whitmore's personal investment accounts. The silence that followed was enormous. Daniel slowly turned toward his mother. Patricia's face went completely pale. Walter continued without raising his voice. Mrs. Whitmore encouraged several high-risk investments during the same period. Mr. Whitmore claimed severe financial hardship. Daniel stared at her. You said those accounts were protected. They were supposed to be, she snapped. There it was. The truth finally dragging itself into daylight after years underground. Daniel was not innocent. But he was not the architect either. He was weak enough to follow the loudest voice in whatever room he stood in. Eleanor had seen that clearly years before I could admit it. I looked back down at her letter. You cannot save people who willingly hand their conscience to someone else. A tear slid down my cheek before I could stop it. Not because of the money. Because I suddenly understood how long I had been fighting completely alone for a marriage that Daniel had stopped protecting long before that driveway. Walter spoke softly. Your grandmother's primary concern was ensuring you were not left financially destroyed after this divorce. Divorce. That word sounded different now. Not like death. Like release. Daniel finally whispered, Claire, I am sorry, and for the first time that entire evening, I believed he meant it. But strangely, that no longer changed anything at all. That strange thing about betrayal. It does not always arrive all at once. Sometimes it comes quietly, layer by layer, until one final truth makes all the other layers collapse together at once. That night in the hotel lounge, I watched 27 years of marriage unravel in less than an hour. And I was not the person falling apart, Patricia was. You are making me sound like some kind of criminal. She snapped at Walter. I am making you sound documented. He replied. The younger attorney slid another set of papers across the table. Patricia barely glanced at them. Daniel read every word. And, as he read, something changed in his face. Shock first, then confusion, then something I had not seen on him in years. Real anger, not toward me, toward her. You moved money out of the business account. He said quietly. It was temporary. Daniel laughed once under his breath. That is what I told Claire. Patricia's eyes narrowed. Do not start blaming me for your own decisions. You told me Claire would take everything if we waited. You said we had to move fast. You said the trust paperwork was irrelevant. I was protecting you. No. Daniel looked at her with something raw and exhausted in his eyes. You were protecting yourself. That sentence hung over the table like smoke, and I sat quietly beside them, watching two people who had operated as a unified force for decades finally turn on each other the moment consequences appeared. Eleanor used to say that greed is loyal only until fear arrives. Sitting in that hotel lounge, I understood exactly what she meant. Walter eventually drove me to Eleanor's estate in Aspen that night. The caretaker, a quiet older man named Benji, opened the gates and said simply, Miss Clare, I am sorry about your grandmother. Those words broke something open inside me that everything else had not. Because for hours nobody had spoken about Eleanor herself. Only money, property, divorce, ownership, but she was not paperwork. She was the woman who taught me to bake peach cobbler, the woman who mailed handwritten birthday cards every year without exception, the woman who drove 12 hours through a snowstorm after my mother died because she refused to let me grieve alone. The estate looked exactly as I remembered. Warm lights through tall windows, snow on every surface, the porch swing creaking gently in the mountain wind. I wandered through the quiet rooms until I found myself standing in Eleanor's study, and there on her desk, sitting perfectly centered, was one final letter. I laughed through sudden tears. Even gone, she had perfect timing. The letter said simply, "First, breathe. You have spent most of your adult life carrying everyone else's emotions before your own." I sat down in her chair and read every word. She told me I would want to rescue Daniel emotionally. She told me not to confuse pity with responsibility. She told me that real love never asks you to shrink first. And sitting there in the aspen silence, surrounded by her books and her records and the faint smell of cinnamon from her kitchen, I realized something I had not fully understood until that exact moment. I was not lonely, not even slightly. For years I had confused companionship with safety. I had confused endurance with love. I had confused keeping peace with being strong. But real safety does not require you to earn basic kindness every single day. 1 year later, I stood in Eleanor's kitchen watching sunlight spill across snow-covered mountains. A blueberry cobbler cooling beside the window. Marianne was arranging flowers. Benji was arguing with Walter about football. Everything was warm and imperfect and genuinely good. Marianne walked in and looked at me for a moment. Then she said simply, "You look lighter." I laughed. That obvious. Yes, I had heard from Daniel twice by then. Letters, not phone calls. Apologies first, then sadness, then eventually a quiet admission. "Your grandmother understood people better than I ever did." Patricia had hired separate counsel and blamed him publicly. Several of their friends disappeared once the scandal spread through their social circles. The business collapsed completely under legal debt. I never responded to the letters, not because I hated him. Strangely, I did not. Time had softened the sharpest edges. What remained was simply acceptance. Daniel was not destroyed by one terrible decision. He was destroyed slowly by a lifetime of choosing the easier direction. And I had been too, just differently. That evening, as sunset painted the snow gold and orange across the mountains, I finally stopped mourning my marriage. Because I understood at last that I had actually been grieving it for years. I had just been too loyal, or too afraid, to call it by its real name. Walter raised his glass toward me from across the dinner table. "To Eleanor," he said quietly. "To Eleanor," I repeated. And sitting there surrounded by warmth instead of tension, real laughter instead of careful silence, I understood exactly what my grandmother had truly given me. Not money, not property, not revenge. She gave me clarity before it was too late to rebuild. That was the real inheritance. If this story meant something to you today, if you have ever stayed somewhere too long, because you convinced yourself that leaving meant failing, I want you to remember this one thing. It is never too late to choose peace over performance. And sometimes the greatest act of strength is simply becoming someone that nobody can shrink anymore. Please like this video if Claire's story moved you. Subscribe so you never miss another story like this one. And share this today with someone who needs the reminder that they are not alone. And they never were. I will see you in the next one.